Most men believe respect is something they must constantly fight for. They think they need to prove their strength, defend their opinions, and show dominance in every conversation. But if you watch carefully in any social group, you will notice something interesting. The men who are tested the most are usually the ones trying the hardest to prove themselves. They argue more. They react faster. They defend every comment. And because of that, people instinctively push them more. They challenge their ideas, interrupt their words, and provoke emotional reactions. But there is another type of man in the room. The man nobody tests. And it is not because he is physically intimidating or loud. In fact, he is often the quietest person in the room. He does not rush to prove his intelligence. He does not explain himself unnecessarily. He does not react emotionally when someone challenges him. And that behavior creates a psychological signal that most people immediately recognize, even if they cannot explain it. This man is difficult to move. When someone tries to provoke him, he does not react instantly. When someone interrupts him, he calmly continues speaking. When someone challenges him, he listens before responding. This slow, controlled behavior creates tension for people who rely on reactions to feel powerful. Because the moment someone realizes they cannot easily influence your emotions, they lose their ability to control the interaction. And control is the main reason people test others in the first place. People test boundaries to see how far they can push. They test reactions to see how easily someone can be influenced. But when someone shows emotional stability and controlled behavior from the beginning, something interesting happens. The tests never begin. Because people quickly understand something important about him. Pressure will not move him. And once that realization appears, the dynamic of the entire room changes quietly. People start treating him differently, not because he demanded respect, but because they instinctively understand that provoking him will not work. The reason some men are constantly tested while others are left alone has nothing to do with physical strength or social status. It has everything to do with psychological signals. Humans are extremely good at reading emotional stability. We do it instinctively. Within seconds of meeting someone, people begin evaluating how that person reacts to pressure, disagreement, or tension. If someone reacts quickly, becomes defensive, or tries to prove themselves too much, it creates a signal of emotional accessibility. In other words, people learn that this person can be moved. And once people believe they can move you emotionally, they begin testing how far that influence goes. The tests can appear in many forms. Sometimes it is a sarcastic comment. Sometimes it is an interruption in conversation. Sometimes it is a challenge to your opinion in front of others. These small social pressures are rarely random. They are unconscious experiments. People are measuring your reactions. If you become irritated, you fail the test. If you rush to defend yourself, you fail the test. If you try too hard to prove your point, you fail the test. Because every emotional reaction reveals something important. The environment can control your behavior. But the man nobody tests sends the opposite signal from the beginning. When someone interrupts him, he does not rush to speak louder. When someone disagrees with him, he does not immediately argue back. When someone tries to provoke him, he pauses instead of reacting. This pause is extremely powerful because it disrupts the psychological rhythm of the interaction. Most people expect instant reactions. They rely on emotional speed to control conversations. But when that reaction never appears, something strange happens. The person who tried to test you suddenly becomes uncertain about how far they can push. And uncertainty weakens the desire to challenge you further. Over time, people begin to understand that emotional pressure does not work on you. And when people cannot influence your reactions, They stop trying to test them in the first place. Another important reason some men are never tested is because they control the tempo of the interaction. Most people operate at the speed of emotion. When someone challenges them, they react immediately. When someone raises their voice, they respond with equal intensity. When tension appears in the room, they rush to dissolve it by explaining themselves or trying to win the argument quickly. This fast emotional reaction creates a predictable rhythm, and predictability makes someone easy to control. If people know exactly how you react under pressure, they know how to influence the direction of the conversation. But the man nobody tests behaves differently. Instead of speeding up when tension appears, he slows down. When someone challenges his opinion, he listens before responding. When someone interrupts him, he calmly continues speaking without raising his voice. When someone becomes aggressive, he lowers his tone rather than matching their intensity. This change in rhythm creates something very powerful: psychological weight. Suddenly, the interaction feels different. The person trying to dominate the conversation cannot rely on the usual emotional reactions. Their sarcasm produces no irritation. Their challenges produce no defensiveness. Their pressure produces no panic. And without those reactions, their strategy loses momentum. People who rely on dominance games begin to feel uncomfortable because the expected emotional feedback never appears. The room becomes quieter. The pace becomes slower. And the man who remains composed starts to control the entire atmosphere of the interaction. Humans instinctively respect the person who controls the emotional tempo of a conversation. When someone remains calm while others become emotional, the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. The louder others become, the more composed he appears. The more emotional others become, the more disciplined he looks. Over time, people begin associating that calm behavior with authority. And once someone gains that reputation, something interesting happens. The tests disappear completely. The deeper psychology behind a man nobody tests is very simple. People stop testing those they cannot control. Every social interaction contains small attempts at influence. Sometimes people do it consciously, but most of the time it happens automatically. Someone interrupts to see if you stop talking. Someone makes a sarcastic remark to see if you react emotionally. Someone challenges your opinion in front of others to see how stable you remain under pressure. These are not always hostile actions. Often they are simply ways people measure strength, confidence, and emotional discipline. But once people realize that their behavior does not move you, the tests lose their purpose. The man nobody tests sends that signal very early. His behavior stays consistent regardless of pressure. When someone tries to provoke him, his tone remains calm. When someone challenges him, he does not rush to defend himself emotionally. When tension appears in the room, he allows the silence to exist without trying to escape it. This stability creates a psychological barrier. The person who wanted to test him begins to feel something different: hesitation. Because testing someone only works when the tester believes they can produce a reaction. If sarcasm does not trigger irritation, it loses power. If confrontation does not trigger defensiveness, it loses influence. If pressure does not trigger panic, it becomes useless. And once people realize their tools are ineffective, they stop using them entirely. This is why the strongest social presence often belongs to the calmest person in the room. Not because he dominates others, but because his emotional discipline makes dominance unnecessary. People instinctively respect individuals who cannot be easily moved. Over time, this becomes a reputation. Others begin describing him in subtle ways. They say he is hard to shake. They say he never overreacts. They say he carries himself differently. What they are really describing is control. And control changes the entire social dynamic. When people see that you control your reactions, they stop trying to control you. That is the psychology of a man nobody tests.